You know what's really interesting, just talking to people recently, hearing all these stories, is understanding how compartmentalized his life was. He led a very rich life. He had so many different aspects to his life. And hearing a story from these people or those people, there are things that we're learning we didn't even know about, which makes it, I don't know, really amazing that somebody on the surface who might look like he led a simple life, he led a very rich life.
He didn't lead a simple life at all.
Yeah, sounds like a great life.
Maybe simply materialistic, like he didn't have a car.
Yeah. Daily phone calls.
Yep.
If not more.
Every day. Hello, Kathleen, and how are you? Every day. If he was in Florida, I'd get the weather report. Wherever he was, he would call me.
My name is Sister Annelle Fitzpatrick. I went to grammar school with Greg back in the 1950s. 1st to 8th grade, graduated. He went to Malloy. I went my way. Kathy went her way. But we always kept up the bond. So it's a friendship that spanned 70 years. And I think I remember what stands out the most. He was very bright. I mean, he was always getting A's in everything, but very humble.
He liked to share his knowledge.
Yeah.
He would always be more than willing to open his doors to visitors and play ambassador, right? Let's go to the Met. And I don't think there's one thing in the Met that he wasn't an authoritative expert on.
Greg and I, we've been friends since 1987. I met Greg. You know, I was always impressed with the amount of knowledge that he had. When so many times he would have friends and acquaintances who he knew were coming to New York City. He would open his door and allow them to, stay with him. He would plan their itinerary, and he would be like a New York ambassador.
Greg Stein was my great, great friend. I met Greg almost 30 years ago. I had just founded the first ever Queens LGBTQ Pride Parade, and Greg, who was at that time a board member of the AIDS Center of Queens County, or ACQC, came to a meeting. He was such a wonderful man, so involved in causes for those who could not speak for themselves, particularly LGBTQ people and people living with HIV and AIDS. He was a wonderful addition to the board of the Queens Pride Committee. He was trustworthy, he was honest, he was upfront, he knew his stuff. He was a math teacher, so he took care of the treasury very well for us. He knew how to work numbers, and he was just overall supportive. He was supportive of me and the things that I was trying to do. But one thing is that Greg never really wanted to seek glory for himself. He always was behind the scenes, working hard for the causes that we both believed in.
But he was always grateful and appreciative whenever he would be invited out or to have other people's company, whether it's just to go to dinner, for the conversation and the company. And each year there were a group of us who Greg would hold what he would call his Friends Appreciation Dinner. And at that dinner, it was his thank you to those people who invite him out or treat him to a meal, or even sometimes just be his company, his friend and company.
Those are fun nights.
Yes.
So we get quite the group at the table.
After a number of years of the Pride Committee, I decided I was going to run for political office in 2002. Of course, it was natural for me at that time to turn to the person who I trusted the most in the whole world, and that was Greg Stein. And As a political candidate, Greg had to file reports for me. He did that for 20 years for me. Oftentimes, though, when it was actually election time, he had to file reports more often. Those reports meant that he had to list and file the names of every single contributor to my campaign, and he had to make sure that the books matched. It is a job that really no one wants, but Greg did it, and I think that he did it mostly because of his support for me.
I don't think he ever imagined that any of these things would go on for him.
No, and I don't think he did not do them for that
this,
recognition.
for this,
but he
not at
had
all.
his hands in many different types of organizations.
Never talked
He had-
about it. You never know. You just figured it out. And if you didn't figure it out, you didn't know.
It was very obvious at his funeral mass of his devotion to the church. I was shocked that, was it every priest of that parish and the bishop? All of that, I mean,
Well, he used
who
to
gets
go,
that kind of a
He
turnout?
used to go to the opera with one of those Monsignors, one of the Vicari brothers. I don't know if it was the Monsignor or the other one, but they were opera buddies.
Greg was really serious about religion. By New York demographics, he really should have been Jewish. He went to City College, he worked as a New York City school teacher, he lived in Forest Hills, and his name was Stein. But it happens he was Catholic, and he was a really serious Catholic. My wife and I arrived in Ireland one time, and who did we run into in Shannon Airport but Greg Stein? What are you doing here, Greg? Well, he said, I won a week in Ireland on the prayer channel. Really serious stuff.
You, Eric, referenced his fraternity brothers when he would get to Iowa. At his wake, for those who didn't have the privilege of being there, there was a service at the very end where his fraternity brothers all stood in front of the casket and gave testimony, and it was very moving. It was holy. It was better than any priest walking in and saying a canned prayer. It was really from the heart, and I was very impressed by those fraternity brothers that flew just to say goodbye. And there was such a bond there that nourished him, and he spoke so often of his real love for his fraternity, and I can see why.
He was a dear friend. He was loved by everyone in the community. I'm proud to say that now we are planning to name a street after Greg. The block right where he lived, 77th Avenue and Queens Boulevard in Forest Hill, Queens.
His legacy to me was, I hope when my time comes, I can have the composure, the dignity, the calmness, and almost the resignation. He said, it's time. Let's get on the flight. And that to me was extraordinary.
He was a worker, a good person, a good friend, a good brother. He was an amazing man. And so I'm so glad that your fraternity is honoring him in this way. It is fitting and right that you do so.
Saying goodbye to Greg was one of the hardest things I've ever done, considering he was so composed and accepting. He was a bright light in my life, and now that light has gone out. I miss you, Greg. Love, Kathy, a.k.a. Kathleen.
Well, should we all have a toast to Greg?
Absolutely.
That's a nice way to end.
And then we can...
Yeah.
To our friend.
Thanks for being part of the journey, Greg.